Good morning, everyone. I hope you all can hear me okay. It is such a joy to be here this morning with you all. Thank you so much to Professor Fuller for organizing the symposium. My name is Dr. Sidonia Serafini. I'm an assistant professor of English at Georgia College and State University, and my research and teaching focuses on early African American literature and newspapers. The title of my talk today is John W. Lemon's Agricultural Vignettes and the Calhoun Land Company. In 1897, following the inaugural Negro Conference at Hampton Institute, editors of the Southern Workman, which was Hampton's central periodical, announced the following. A request was made by certain prominent members of the conference for more information along educational, industrial, and agricultural lines. Inspired by Booker T. Washington's annual Tuskegee Negro Farmers Conferences, the Hampton Negro Conference centered issues that were pressing to Southern Black agricultural communities. Attendees deliberated ways to disentangle African Americans in the rural South from renting, mortgage, and sharecropping systems, exploitative practices that Douglas Blackman has aptly termed slavery by another name. They proposed that Black Americans not only secure land, but also receive an education in skilled farming and scientific agriculture. The call for these changes to the Southern Workman by conference goers resulted in a wave of agricultural writings by and for African Americans who aspired to land ownership, prosperous farming, labor autonomy, and economic security as pathways toward full citizenship, when the promises of the 14th Amendment had gone unfulfilled. In addition to featuring the voices of some of the most visible African American figures, including Anna Julia Cooper, Paul Laurence Dunbar, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Booker T. Washington, the Southern Workman showcased writings by local agricultural leaders and farmers. Southern Workman subscribers could find inspiration, for instance, in the stories of everyday citizens, from Judia C. Jackson Harris, who reported on the work of her Black industrial school, farming settlement, and annual Farmers' Day in Athens, Georgia. You'll see the photograph of her corn club and her school on the left. They could also find stories of P.W. Dawkins, who celebrated the improved prosperity of farmers whom he had taught as the farm manager of the Penn School on St. Helena Island, South Carolina. And you can see photographs of the school on the right-hand side of the screen. Visually reinforcing such content, cover pages and illustrations in the Southern Workman dignified the labor of those who lived close to the land, and advertisements encouraged how Black farmers might make the farm economically prosperous. Farming pays, announced an ad in the September 1907 issue, when the farmer combined scientific methods with his labor. The ad's byline, that the sun and the soil have no race prejudice, implicitly referenced the violent history of enslavement and the repressive sharecropping practices that Hampton was now helping to eradicate. A salient story of the nexus of cooperation, education, land, and farming that emerged in the pages of the Southern Workman is that of John W. Lemon. A Hampton graduate, Lemon became the farm manager for the Calhoun Colored School in Calhoun, Lowndes County, Alabama. A Little Tuskegee, the Calhoun Colored School was an industrial school for African Americans. It was established in 1892 by two Northern white women, Charlotte Thorne and Mabel Dillingham, with the help of Booker T. Washington. As Diane Glave has noted of Southern states during this time, of approximately 250,000 African American farmers, more than 170,000 were wage laborers, 70,000 were tenants and cash renters, and fewer than 10,000 were farmer owner operators. Lemon's goal was to invert these numbers. He strove to decrease the number of Black wage laborers, tenants, and renters, and to increase the number of Black farmers who would never again have to pay a landowner to live on and cultivate the land, to never again split the fruits of their labor. To accomplish this vision, Lemon traveled throughout the Black Belt region, helping Black families secure land and rise out of debt, a tool of economic oppression that W.B. Du Bois had described in The Souls of Black Folk as the keynote of the Black Belt and the direct heritage of the South from the wasteful economies of the slave regime. To further these goals, Lemon established the Calhoun Land Company in 1896. With the financial assistance of Northern philanthropists, the companies purchased the LeGrand, Chestnut, Harris, and Norwood plantations in Calhoun and sold 10 to 60-acre tracts of land on these properties to Black farmers. By 1909, 13 years after Lemon established the land company, 85 farmers had secured 92 property deeds, totaling to 4,081 acres of land. Monica White, in her recent study, Freedom Farmers, has explored African-American agricultural cooperatives like the land company that Lemon helped to establish. Moving beyond the scholarly emphasis on the talented 10th, which has a laser focus that has failed to capture the roles of Black working class men and women, and has thus often ignored the legacy of Black farmers and those who live close to the land, White shows how farmers created these sites as the basis for self-reliant and self-determined community. She demonstrates how Black-owned and operated farms became spaces and places to practice freedom. Lemon's land buying and farming initiatives evidence how rural Black communities organized grassroots coalitions for the sake of race uplift. In his project, Lemon harnessed the periodical press as a means of mobilization. He used the Southern Workman as a platform to circulate his community and cooperative building initiatives by showcasing the success stories of Black farmers with whom he had worked through the Calhoun Land Company. From December 1902 to June 1907, Lemon published a series of writings about Black farmers who had purchased land through the company. He titled these sketches Agricultural Vignettes. Lemon's agricultural vignettes present brief biographical sketches of rural working-class men and women who climbed the socioeconomic ladder from debt to financial solvency and land ownership. Importantly, the portraits humanize Black sharecroppers and renters who had been homogenized as an exploited class of workers. There are several elements that characterize Lemon's vignettes. Number one is a title that uses directional language to indicate a struggle upward and emphasizes hard work and mobility to indicate themes of racial uplift. Number two, a central focus on a journey from destitution or indebtedness to land ownership and economic solvency, usually following one individual's journey. Number three, the use of cautionary language that warns against debt in the form of sharecropping, high interest rates, and mortgage systems, often using language associated with enslavement. Number four, an ethos of racial uplift through an emphasis on autonomy, self-sufficiency, hard work, and thrift. And finally, a catalog of an individual's gains in land purchase and accumulation of capital, as well as his or her productivity in husbandry and homemaking. The Calhoun Land Company and the agricultural vignettes that emerged out of it provided an inspirational model for Southern workman readers, in particular Hampton Institute's current students and its graduates, that could then be replicated throughout the Black Belt. The subjects of the vignettes were often freed people or those born in the generation after emancipation, and in many ways the vignettes resonate with the slave narrative genre. Lemon follows the slave narrative's emphasis on racial uplift through property ownership, foregrounding the importance of owning property by one who was once legally considered property themselves. Saturated with language that both indirectly gestures toward and directly indicts the legacy of slavery in its afterlives, Lemon shows how even after emancipation, Black Southerners combated additional forms of slavery through sharecropping, tenant farming, and indebtedness to a landlord. As Lemon writes in one sketch titled From Dependence to Independence, to go further and further into debt and become more and more dependent upon one's landlord is to go into slavery. The connection here between crippling credit systems and enslavement is also on full display in a vignette titled A 7-Year Struggle, in which Lemon outrightly states that Black farmers have been, quote, enslaved by the fatal mortgage system. In this vignette, Lemon reprints the words of a man named Shelby, who, with the help of the Calhoun School, rose from debt to land ownership. As a sharecropper, Shelby tells Lemon, I had to mortgage my land, stock, crop, and everything I owned. My wife and I both signed our rights away, and for the first time I began to think how I should get out. Shelby's description of his experience as a sharecropper resonates less with farming and more with imprisonment or enslavement. When Shelby tells Lemon that his and his wife's lack of access to their homestead and means of livelihood is the equivalent of signing our rights away, Shelby compares his struggle with the oppressive credit system to the struggle for civil rights. The absence of full ownership, then, is synonymous here with the absence of full citizenship. Making visible the contingencies of Black farmers' relationship with the land, Lemon often employs the term staying. Placed almost always in quotation marks, the word calls attention to the precarities of security, longevity, and belonging of farmers whose homesteads and livelihoods are dependent upon the will of another, usually a white landlord. As Lemon opens one vignette, a farmer named James Taylor had been staying on the Chestnut Place for 14 years. Another vignette begins in the same manner. Wiley had been staying on the LeGrand plantation for 17 years. Yet again, a man named Tyson had been staying on his landlord's property for so long that he thought it best for him not to break off too suddenly. The term staying reinforces in multiple ways the precarity of renting versus ownership. On the one hand, it signals Black renters' position as mere visitors or guests on the land of someone else, a position that could be terminated for reasons outside of their control, if, for example, a crop goes bad, or the landlord decides to raise the rent. On the other hand, staying implies legal connotations. To stay in a courtroom means to pause, delay, or prevent the judicial process. For Lemon, the precarity of renting is linked directly to the delay of justice, to the instability of citizenship and freedom that led Frederick Douglass, in his 1888 speech at the 26th anniversary of emancipation, to assert that the so-called emancipation was a stupendous fraud. Citing rent laws across the southern states that left room for the gratuitous exploitation of Black renters and farmers, Douglass's connection between renting and second-class citizenship is echoed in Lemon's term staying. By way of landlord and tenant laws, among other injustices, the Black American, Douglass urged, is the victim of a cunningly devised swindle, is a deserted, a defrauded, a swindled, and an outcast man who is in law free, in fact a slave, in law a citizen, in fact an alien. For Lemon, the remedy for staying is land and home ownership, is owning and tilling one's own land. And by each vignette's end, the term staying is replaced with the word living, signaling the transformative power that land offers in terms of security and longevity. Now, what emerges from this kind of permanency is a pathway towards citizenship that exceeds mere ownership and economic freedom. Within the Calhoun Land Company's project to sow the seeds of citizenship through this coalition of agents and farmers is the conviction that land ownership directly strengthens the family unit. Portraits of close-knit Black families become models of citizenship, wherein its members provide for one another the security, belonging, and access to land that is otherwise withheld by sharecropping and renting systems. In a vignette titled Toiling Upward, Lemon tells the story of a farmer named Harris. From 1880 to 1901, Harris struggled under the weight of debts to secure a home for himself and his family after renting land for 26 years. Lemon uses the language of soldiery and valor to depict Harris's struggles. In the battle that Harris had to fight, Lemon writes, his courage was greatly tested. Harris had nearly purchased land multiple times, but each time he was set back in these endeavors because he put his family first. When his son became ill, eventually succumbing to his sickness, Harris paid his medical bills despite that such financial strains forced him into debt. Then, when his aged mother's landlord evicted her, he built for her a cabin near his own, although his own health was failing him. Harris, as Lemon states, continued toiling upward in the night. The phrase, which is lifted from the poem The Ladder of St. Augustine by poet and abolitionist Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, connects Harris's struggles to slavery, and it also pays homage to the sacrifices of Black fathers who forego rest in order to provide a home for their family. Inspired by Longfellow, who used his poetry as an anti-slavery tool, Lemon, too, uses his agricultural vignettes to combat additional forms of enslavement after emancipation. The reference to Longfellow's poem stresses the struggles and sacrifices of Black fathers like Harris, whose efforts were not in vain. Eventually, Harris's eldest son, following his father's example, secured a deed on a 25-acre lot joining his father's. The contiguous tracts of land are symbolic of their father-son bond and of generational wealth. Not merely economic wealth, but also familial prosperity, as the land might be passed down for generations to come. Like much Black farming literature of this era, the agricultural vignettes are a male-dominated genre. But women are also present as active agents of familial prosperity, even if their stories are told through others' recollections. One vignette, titled The New Road, tells the story of a mother of a farmer and aspiring landowner named James Taylor. James and his 3 siblings were raised by their single mother, an indefatigable female tiller of the soil. As the burden rested on her to be the family's sole provider, she rented land and worked hard on her farm to support her children. Without the support of childcare, her and her children tended their crops of cotton and corn together. The vignette centers familial cooperation and generational inheritance. James and his brothers loved and respected their mother, Lemon writes, and they soon grew to love the work on the farm. So in 1892, when the Calhoun School purchased the chestnut plantation, James purchased a 50-acre tract of land to start his own farm. And most importantly, as he says, he kept his mother with him. Lemon goes on, James had built a little cabin with his own hands, a stable, team, farming tools, 2 cows, and a good garden. His mother is still with him. She raises poultry. James says, I feel something like a man that's been carrying a heavy burden and done lost that burden. My mother done been helping me all the way through, and I'm going to make half of what I got over to her. Yes, sir, half. She's my mother, half. I want her to stay right there with me. Yes, sir, no departing. The story of James and his mother is framed with the language of familial duty, whereas the story opens with James' mother's burdens of economic precarity and the potential loss of their home. It closes with James assuming these burdens for her and ultimately casting them off altogether. The closing words, no departing, are as much a statement of familial closeness as they are a direct reference to the ways in which the land can be a remedy to the separation of Black families and slavery. Land emerges as a site that, as activist and farmer Leah Penniman explains, reconciles traumatic ancestral violence and loss by positioning the earth as a liberatory site. In counteracting such violence, the agricultural vignettes position Black farmers and families as creating strong homes, and as a result being at home in the nation, by growing thriving crops and families upon the soil. Readers who opened The Southern Workman to Lemon's vignettes not only found a guide for how they might secure land, they also found hope. What motivated Lemon to put pen to paper was to guide and encourage Southern African Americans who sought to cultivate racial uplift and citizenship through land ownership and farming. From formerly enslaved African American sharecroppers suffering under crippling debt to a new generation of Hampton graduates contemplating their future, Southern Workman readers found in Lemon's agricultural vignettes concrete models of citizenship that instilled a sense of race pride and, more importantly, dignified those who tilled the land. The narratives painted a sense of possibility and hope onto pursuits that for decades had seemed for many Southern African Americans hopeless. As scholars continue to explore the dynamic ways that African Americans engaged with periodicals in particular, agricultural literature that appeared in Black industrial school periodicals like The Southern Workman offers a rich archive for understanding how such print spaces shaped and were also shaped by Black farming communities. The Southern Workman is just one avenue through which we can explore how rural Black Southerners in the Jim Crow South reclaimed the land as a site of strength, autonomy, and knowledge, and located a form of citizenship rooted in the land as a symbol of and remedy for the ongoing African American freedom struggle. The stories that Lemon shared only begin to skim the surface. Thank you.